from Kylie Rich. So this afternoon we have kayaking, golf, and then ACL as well. So the kayakers are meeting in the lobby, and they'll be shuttled over to where the kayaks are. The golfers, as I understand it, have all received their own instructions about tee times and how to get where they're going. Now the ACL experience, how many people are going to ACL? It's sponsored today by, the VIP attendance is sponsored today by JW Player. So we're thankful to that group. And they're also, by the way, here are the wristbands. My staff didn't want to give them to me because they were afraid I'd lose them, which I haven't so far. And so after lunch, John Whitfield will be in charge of arranging the disbursement of the wristbands for all those who are going to ACL. The VIPs who are being sponsored and paid for by JW Player, there's going to be a cocktail party right nearby the entrance to ACL at a place called Juliet's, also sponsored by JW Player. And so we want the VIPs to come back to that cocktail party and thank JW Player for their experience. After cocktails and dinner, I think dinner's a little optional, but cocktails, you need to be there, VIP people. After that, you'll be able to go back into ACL for the entire evening until they kick you out. What time does that happen, John?
Okay, so you're allowed to go in and out of ACL 3 times, okay, in a day. So pace yourself. Basically, go in, have a good time, come out at 5:30, go to Juliet, have a drink with us, and then you can go back in if you like, or you can stay and have dinner. Important, at 2 o'clock, we're going to take a shuttle bus over to the ACL as close as we can get you there, about a couple blocks away. So at 2 o'clock, we'll have a shuttle bus. Then another one at 5 o'clock will be going over for the golfers and kayakers, okay, 5 o'clock. And then tonight, after dinner, we'll have an 8 o'clock shuttle back. So if you go to ACL and you stay late for GNR or whoever's playing, you're going to be on your own to get back. It's actually not that bad of a walk from here. It's about a mile and change. You can walk it. But that's what's going on with the shuttles. And if you're playing golf today, you already know your tee times. You got that sorted out, and so that's what I know.
Okay, good. So at the conclusion of lunch, John will arrange the disbursement of the wristbands, and then you'll find the bus, and the bus will go at 2 o'clock. So thanks today to Permutive for sponsoring lunch. We're going to hear from Kylie Rich. He's the sales director over there, and he's going to be talking about unlocking scale and revenue through first-party data. Kylie?
Great. Check. Hi, guys. I have the really daunting task of speaking to you right after lunch, and of course 20 minutes before everyone wants to go to ACL, so this should be really fun. I promise I'll keep it interesting. So yeah, let's get started. So first, who am I? I'm Kylie Rich, sales director for Permutive. Today we're going to talk about specifically a use case of one of our customers, Entrepreneur Media, and how they unlocked both scale and revenue using their first-party data and insights. So just some quick context about who Permutive is. If there's anything that you take away from this talk today, it's that Permutive is a data management platform that is a profit center and not a cost center. So that's probably in contrast to what historically everyone's used to. But in fact, actually, every time we go in and we replace an incumbent DMP solution, whether it is homegrown, an in-house solution, or a legacy solution, we actually increase data-driven ad revenue by 4x across the board, and that's at minimum. And so because of that revenue increase, we've seen a lot of success recently. Namely, we've picked up quite a few prestigious key logos on our roster, Business Insider, BuzzFeed, Condé Nast International, Vox, quite a few people here probably in the crowd today too. And I think ultimately that can be distilled down to one reason why we've seen the success is that we are the first data platform that is entirely built for what publishers need. So we understand that there's a lot of nuanced issues that you're facing today. And I think that's the reason why we've seen this growth is because we're the first people to really tackle these issues. So something that we're facing today, obviously privacy is the biggest issue that's front of mind for everyone. More distinctly put, it's GDPR and the impending CCPA. And in conjunction with that, we have the breaking down of cookies, which obviously with ITPs, so to speak, kicking in the bee's nest of Google. We're seeing third-party data industry start to decline. And we're also waiting for Chrome's anticipated response, which obviously they can't pretend like they have their hands tied behind their back at this point. So they need to do something. So the future is, we don't know what's going to happen. But I think right now it's important to really start to think about future-proofing yourself as a business. And one of those direct results of that is actually the cookie breaking. People probably don't know this, but actually the third-party industry, third-party data industry and the cookie itself is very expensive. In fact, IAB actually valued it at about $19 billion. And so essentially by that third-party cookie being on decline, marketers are now forced to, they're in desperate need and in search of a new data source to be able to go to. And so ultimately, this puts publishers in a really great spot. Because of that implied one-to-one relationship that you have with your users, you have really valuable first-party data that you can start to leverage in that conversation and ultimately drive that demand, that desperate demand from those buyers to come to you and essentially combat yourself against that duopoly of Facebook and Google. So when we went to market, initially with our platform, we discovered 3 really salient issues that publishers were facing because of those legacy platforms they were using. And this was the main thing, the bottleneck of stopping them, starting to leverage that first-party data power in driving that demand for buyers to come to them. The first is they just didn't have enough scale to win briefs. And weirdly enough, they felt like they had more scale to take advantage of, but it just was disappearing. There were discrepancies in their audience estimate sizes in their DMPs with Google Analytics, what that was reporting. And they couldn't really understand exactly where that was coming from, and they knew their scale was capped. Secondly, even if they miraculously won those RFPs based on a lack of scale, they struggled to deliver on those RFPs, or on those campaigns, rather. And in part, this started to reflect badly on their sales teams, so they started to lose confidence in selling with data. All of this boils down to over-promising and under-delivering, right? And so they were at risk to have to give back some of that money that was foregone for that campaign. And then third, and probably equally as important for those first 2, especially for US publishers, where maybe scale to pain is not necessarily as powerfully felt or as compelling, but this part I know everyone could improve upon, which is getting better insights on your audiences so that you can sell and drive demand better. And so ultimately, because their legacy platforms they were using was using the same third-party data that every buyer was using, they don't really have any differentiation with any other media outlets, and they really didn't have any leverage in the conversation to control the value of those audiences they were selling. So this was a huge issue, all 3 of these issues. And so to kind of bring it full circle here, I think the best way to demonstrate those 3 issues is through Entrepreneur Media, one of our customers. And they were experiencing essentially all 3 of those issues among several others. And spoiler alert, we solve all of them. But to give you a little bit of background about Entrepreneur Media, they are a relatively verticalized publisher focused on entrepreneurs and small business owners. They have a significant following, both in social and unique, and they have quite a bit of revenue diversification and international presence. I think there are some unique things to Entrepreneur, but there are also some representative things of the entire publishing industry that makes them kind of a good poster child, so to speak, of a lot of the issues most people in this crowd are probably facing. So the first, when we started talking with them, the first issue that became most prominent was their scale was capped in particular to one major cohort of visitors that were coming to their sites. And this is what we call passerby traffic, or single-site visitors, flyby visitors. And essentially, this is because their legacy platform works on a process called batch processing. And so ultimately, these users, the 60% of users, wasn't sticking around on the sites long enough to actually get served a targeted ad, and therefore they just weren't being monetized. The way that works actually with legacy platforms is the first visit, a user comes to the site, a cookie is dropped, and then it's not until actually the second visit that you're actually able to activate and monetize on them. So in the case of cookies, where sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's 30 days of an expiration date, if that user comes back past that expiration date, they're not monetized, they're not activated at all, and they're treated like a new user. So this made up about 60% of their traffic, which is an enormous revenue inhibitor. And we find that this is actually pretty representative of every publisher out there. It could be a range of 30 to 70% of your audience is passerby. In addition to that, and this is probably the more obvious one, is with ITP and Safari blocking most of those audiences. Since those legacy platforms are built on being essentially reliant to third-party cookies, you cannot target any users in Safari or Firefox, which made up for Entrepreneur another 20% of the audience. So at the end of the day, they were only targeting and monetizing about 20% of their audience, which enormously inhibited revenue. There were a number of other operational inefficiencies they were experiencing. Obviously, slow segmentation and match rates, which are essentially one piece, both two pieces of the same pie. But essentially, the other side of the coin that they were experiencing problems with is they didn't really have a good grip on being able to differentiate themselves because they just didn't understand their first-party data audiences yet. So they knew they wanted to future-proof themselves against that coming tide and the coming storm, so to speak. Because of that decline in third-party cookies and CCPA, they wanted to diversify themselves and their data offering into first-party as well as third-party. And so this kind of puts it really well, as Mike over at Entrepreneur said. Essentially, we couldn't do really many innovative things. And I think this is kind of representative of how we start most of our conversations out with look, we're not the same as other legacy DMPs because they're just seen as cost centers, right? They're not making you money. So we've worked very hard to challenge that ideology. And so on the bright side of things, the silver lining of this is we came in and we helped provide a solution that was a direct path to ROI for them and solve and alleviate all these issues. So part of our evaluation process is we'll actually run a head-to-head scale test against the incumbent DMP. And what we'll do is we'll create an everybody segment, essentially an apples-to-apples comparison against that legacy DMP. And out of the past 30 scale tests that we've done in the last year, we've won every single one of them. And more importantly and more compelling to hear is out of those 30 tests that we've done, every single time we've won the business of the publisher. And I think it's all about trust, right? It's distilling this down into a conservative ROI model so you have a distinct understanding of this is something you want to take the plunge on. More compelling to me is this is, the methodology of measuring an everybody segment versus an everybody segment is not really indicative of something you're going to do in the real world. So what we'll additionally do is run 2 high-value segments of your choosing against your incumbent DMP to essentially prove out that the things that you're selling out of or the things that you use on a daily basis, we're actually amplifying scale as well, too. And in some of those cases with the high-value segments, we'll actually see a 20 to 30x targetable increase as well. So I think this kind of covers the supply side of the economics 101 conversation, how we amplify that. There's obviously more discussion on the demand side and how we amplify the insights, but all of this is accomplished essentially because we can both activate in session and on first page view those passerby users that legacy DMPs cannot. And then secondly, in Safari and Firefox, because we can utilize essentially the most flexible identifier for whatever environment they're in, we can target those users as well. So at the end of the day, we can see 100% of your users and monetize them too. The point of this slide is essentially to highlight that the supply side and that supply lift that we see with the scale is something that you would immediately see upon implementation of Permutive. Near term to midterm would be more of the demand side, so being able to influence insights and actually have that reflect in the sales collateral that your sales team is drumming up business for. And I think what's more compelling too, is Entrepreneur actually, when they ran that conservative ROI model, it's like clear that the numbers just made sense for them to break contract well early of their contract and for the legacy DMP. And I think the best way to show this, I'm going to fast forward here to the stats, the results, the meat and potatoes of this, right? We actually, within 2 months, showed a 1,094% ROI for Entrepreneur Media, which is not a typo. And usually when we show this case study to people, they're like, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? But I would encourage you to run this test at home. And actually, we're going to fast forward to that here. You can actually do this yourself when you go home. You can run your own everyone segment, and essentially you're just running a query to check the total ad impressions against an everyone segment, and that percentage of total impressions that your DMP is unable to target. That's essentially the result there. So a little homework for you guys on Monday when you get back. Not right now, I promise. Are there any questions? I know I sped through quite a bit there. I got a thumbs up.
Hold on.
Good.
No.
Hey, this is Andres with BounceX. Couple questions, but so how do you get, without getting into spilling any trade secret or anything obviously confidential, but just at a high level and as if I were 5 years old, how is it that you guys do it, whereas these legacy DMPs just couldn't do what you guys do?
Yeah, no problem. And explain like I'm 5 if you guys are Reddit readers. So essentially, instead of using batch processing, which legacy DMPs do, all that essentially means is that the communication time that the DMP takes to communicate with DFP, their integration, is actually anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to actually get that targeted ad fed back to them. So what's unique about Permutive, and probably our key differentiator, is we're built on something called edge technology. So essentially, that just means instead of relying on that server-side connection, we have a client-side connection, and all the segmentation and processing is pushed to the device. And so ultimately, that means instead of having that information passed back and forth and having to wait 12 to 24 hours, everything is done in sub 150 milliseconds. And that's how we're actually able to do things in session, first page view, target 100% of your users. Did that answer?
And it's not cookie reliant.
No, it is not. Yep. So cookieless is probably not the greatest. It's somewhat of a misnomer. So in the case of Safari, we'll revert to local storage. But in Chrome, where cookies are allowed, we'll still use a first-party cookie. I think the key differentiator, again, is that edge technology. So being able to actually capitalize on most of this audience. Even if you're using cookies, legacy DMPs can't really monetize on them. So.
Anyone else? Okay. Well,
everyone's like, I want to get out of here. Concert.